There is a secret that Washington does not want you to know, a secret that keeps the top executives of the most powerful oil companies in the world awake at night, a secret that could completely change the balance of power across the American continent. And that secret has a name. Mexico has declared an economic war on the United States, and it is winning. What Claudia Sheinbaum did just 3 weeks ago in December 2025 is something no Mexican president had dared to do in almost 100 years. She permanently shut the door on American oil ambitions, and the most shocking part is that Washington cannot do absolutely anything to stop it. Nothing. Zero options. Lawyers reviewed it carefully. Strategists analyzed it in detail. Generals studied it from every possible angle. And the conclusion was devastating for the United States. Mexico holds all the winning cards. My name is Richard Wolff. I am an economist and professor emeritus at the University of Massachusetts. For more than 40 years, I have studied power relations between the United States and Latin America. I have witnessed coups, military interventions, and economic blockades. I have documented how American imperialism destroyed entire economies. But what is happening right now has no precedent. For the first time in modern history, a Latin American country has the United States backed into a corner, and that country is Mexico. Let me explain why Donald Trump is furious, why the CEOs of Chevron and ExxonMobil are in panic, and why the State Department called emergency meetings in the middle of the night. The reason is simple but crushing. Mexico controls something the United States desperately needs and cannot easily get from any other nearby source. Oil, but not just any oil, Mexican oil. 100,000 barrels per day that keep refineries in Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi running. Now listen carefully, because this is where things become truly explosive. The new reforms signed by Sheinbaum require that 80% of Mexico's oil production must be processed by Pemex or by Mexican state-owned companies. Do you understand what this means? American corporations that invested billions of dollars are now facing a harsh reality. Either they accept being minority partners with the Mexican government, or they leave the country with nothing. Legally, they cannot stop it. And this is only the beginning. What my sources inside the Mexican government revealed to me is even more shocking. Mexico is not only closing the door to American oil companies, Mexico is also opening the door to China. In November 2025, just 1 month before the reforms, a Chinese delegation visited Mexico City in complete secrecy. No press releases, no official ceremonies, no cameras. Executives from Sinopec, China's state-owned oil company, met with officials from Mexico's Ministry of Energy. The topic was a 20-year oil agreement worth $150 billion. Imagine the scene in Washington when they found out. Trump had just started his second term, promising to dominate energy across the hemisphere, promising that Mexico would bow to the United States. And suddenly he discovers that Mexico is about to sign the largest oil deal in its history with its number one geopolitical rival. The humiliation was total. The sense of powerlessness was absolute. Now I will tell you what happened at the secret National Security Council meeting 2 weeks ago, a meeting so classified that only 5 people attended. President Trump, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, the Secretary of Energy, and a general from Northern Command. They were presented with a 120-page report analyzing every possible response to Mexico, and every single option led to the same outcome: guaranteed failure. The first option was to impose 25% tariffs on Mexican products. The problem was immediate. This would push inflation higher in the United States at a time when Trump voters were already angry about rising prices. Experts calculated that the average price of a car would increase by $8,000. Avocado prices would triple. Construction projects would stop because Mexican steel would become too expensive. Politically, it would be suicide. The second option was to block exports of refined gasoline to Mexico. But Mexico had already planned for this. The Dos Bocas refinery, built by López Obrador and expanded by Sheinbaum, can process 340,000 barrels per day. Mexico is rapidly reducing its dependence on American fuel, and within 2 years it could become fully self-sufficient. The third option was to apply pressure through the trade agreement between Mexico, the United States, and Canada. Lawyers from the Department of Commerce reviewed every clause for 72 straight hours looking for a violation. The result was clear. Mexico is not breaking any rule of the agreement. It has the sovereign right to define its own energy policy. End of story. The fourth option was diplomatic pressure through international organizations. And here is the most decisive part. Mexico presented its case before the Organization of American States, the United Nations, and international arbitration bodies, and all of them reached the same conclusion. Mexico is legitimately exercising its sovereignty over its natural resources. The United States has no legal basis to object. When Trump heard all of this, according to someone who was in that room, he remained completely silent for 3 full minutes. 3 minutes that felt like an eternity. Then he asked the obvious question, what happens if we invade? The general from Northern Command answered with a single word, catastrophe. Mexico has 130 million people and shares more than 3,000 kilometers of border with the United States. An invasion would create the largest refugee crisis in history, destabilize all of Latin America, destroy what little credibility the United States still has in the world, and on top of that, Mexico would burn its oil wells before allowing the United States to take them. That is the Cardenas Doctrine, established in 1938. It is better to destroy the oil than hand it over to an invader. Now let me tell you something that changes the entire game. Mexico has 6 billion barrels of proven oil reserves. That alone is significant, but there is something else the Mexican government has kept hidden for years. Geological studies in the deep waters of the Gulf of Mexico indicate potential reserves of up to 20 billion barrels. 20 billion barrels is one of the largest oil deposits discovered in recent decades, and Sheinbaum has just made sure it remains under complete Mexican control. U.S. companies knew this, which is why they invested billions of dollars. That is why they pressured Peña Nieto to open the energy sector in 2013. It was not about the current production of 1.8 million barrels per day. It was about the 20 billion barrels sitting underground, waiting to be extracted, and now that treasure is permanently out of their reach. But here comes Mexico's master move. It is not only closing the door to the United States, it is also building alliances with all of its competitors. I already mentioned China, but there are also advanced talks with Russia, with Norway, with Brazil, and with European oil companies that are eager to enter the Mexican market. Mexico is creating a system in which no single country can exert excessive pressure. It is a perfect diversification strategy. And there is more. The agreement with China includes something truly revolutionary. China would pay for Mexican oil not in dollars, but in yuan. Do you understand how big this is? The dollar is the world's reserve currency precisely because oil is traded in dollars. If Mexico, the second largest oil supplier to China after Saudi Arabia, begins selling oil in yuan, other countries will follow. Venezuela has already expressed interest. Brazil is studying the possibility. The dominance of the dollar, built over the last 80 years since Bretton Woods, would begin to erode. At the U.S. Treasury Department, they are terrified. Janet Yellen, when she was Treasury Secretary, warned that de-dollarization was the greatest risk to the U.S. economy, greater than inflation, greater than the deficit, greater than national debt, because if the dollar loses its reserve currency status, the United States loses the ability to print money without inflationary consequences. It loses the ability to finance its massive trade deficit. It loses its main tool of global economic power. Now, I want you to understand something essential. This did not start with Sheinbaum. It began 6 years ago when Andrés Manuel López Obrador came to power in 2018. AMLO quietly started reversing oil privatization, strengthened Pemex, and cancelled unfavorable contracts. He built the Dos Bocas refinery despite heavy criticism from neoliberal economists. Washington protested. Oil companies threatened him, but AMLO did not back down. He was preparing the ground. When Sheinbaum took office in October 2024, many analysts believed she would soften the approach, that she would be more moderate and more willing to negotiate with the United States. They were completely wrong. Sheinbaum is even more determined than AMLO. She is an engineer. She fully understands the oil industry. And she has something AMLO did not have, an even stronger political coalition and a perfect geopolitical moment. Let me explain why the timing matters so much. Trump has returned to power with an aggressive agenda against China. Europe is divided and weakened by the war in Ukraine. The Middle East remains in constant tension and Russia is isolated. In this context, Mexico emerges as a crucial geopolitical player, a country capable of tipping the balance in any direction. And Mexico is using that power with impressive skill. 3 days ago, Sheinbaum delivered a speech at the National Palace that was ignored by U.S. media, but it was historic. She said word for word, Mexico will never again be an economic colony of any power. Our oil is ours. Our future is ours. And anyone who wants to do business with us will do so under our conditions or not at all. The applause lasted 5 minutes. Do you know what is most remarkable? The Mexican population strongly supports this position. Polls show that 87% of Mexicans approve of oil nationalization. This is not just a government project, it is a national project, and that gives Sheinbaum a level of legitimacy that no external pressure can weaken. Now, let me tell you what will happen in the coming months, because this is only the beginning. In February, there will be a trilateral meeting of energy ministers from Mexico, the United States, and Canada. It will be explosive. The United States will pressure, threaten, and attempt to intimidate. Mexico will not give up even an inch. Canada, caught in the middle, will likely lean toward Mexico because it too is tired of U.S. arrogance. In March, Mexico will formalize the agreement with China. It will be the largest trade agreement in the history of Latin America, worth $150 billion over 20 years. China will build port infrastructure, refineries and pipelines, bring cutting-edge drilling technology, and most importantly, offer guaranteed prices that will protect Mexico from oil market volatility. By June, we will see the first concrete results. Mexican production will increase. Government oil revenues will surge. Investment in education, healthcare, and infrastructure will multiply. Mexico will prove that its model works, that economic sovereignty is not a romantic dream, but a real and effective strategy, viable. And here comes what truly scares Washington. If Mexico succeeds, other countries will follow the same path. Venezuela is already studying the Mexican model. Bolivia is interested. Ecuador is watching very closely. Imagine a Latin American bloc of oil-producing countries that control their own resources, that sell in yuan or in their own currencies, that reject the conditions of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. That would mean the end of the system the United States built after World War II. That is why Washington is panicking, why they are calling emergency meetings, why they are looking for any way to destabilize Sheinbaum, but they face a serious problem. Mexico is no longer the Mexico of 1950 or 1980. It is an economy worth nearly $2 trillion. It is the fifth largest economy in the world. It has trade agreements with 46 countries. It has a middle class of 50 million people. You cannot simply overthrow a government like that without catastrophic consequences. Let me be very clear about something. This does not mean Mexico will become a superpower overnight. It still has huge problems: drug-related violence, corruption, inequality, and poverty. But for the first time in decades, it has an economic strategy that does not depend on kneeling before Washington, and that is revolutionary. Now, I want to address something you are probably thinking. What about the oil companies that already invested in Mexico? Do they just lose everything? No, they do not. The reforms give them two options. First, they can partner with Pemex as minority partners. They will still make money, but they will no longer control strategic decisions. Second, they can sell their operations to Mexican or Chinese companies. Many will choose the first option because something is better than nothing. But the humiliation is obvious. Chevron, which once bragged that Mexico had finally come to its senses with the 2013 reform, now has to accept being a junior partner to the Mexican government. ExxonMobil, which dreamed of dominating the Gulf of Mexico, now watches its plans fade away. ConocoPhillips, which invested billions in exploration, now faces the choice of sharing control or leaving. And let me tell you something very few people know. In January 2025, just before Trump took office, a group of oil executives visited Mar-a-Lago. They explained the situation in Mexico and asked him to make it a top priority. Trump promised he would force Mexico to reverse the reforms. 3 weeks later, when his advisors told him there was no legal way to do it,